He found the message by accident. Keep doing what I told you. Let me know if it gets worse. It was from someone named Mark. John had been married to Linda for 44 years. They shared everything, meals, memories, a bed for half a lifetime. But now, she was pulling away, avoiding his touch, sleeping in silence. Was she hiding something or someone? What he uncovered wasn't betrayal. It was something even more heartbreaking, and it changed their love forever. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to click subscribe and turn on the bell. Because sometimes the most powerful love stories begin where the pain almost ends. The house had grown quiet in ways that felt unnatural. Outside, the wind teased the last few golden leaves off the maple tree, scattering them like brittle memories across the back porch. Inside, John sat alone by the window, a half-full mug of lukewarm coffee cradled in his hands, untouched for the past 20 minutes. His gaze wasn't fixed on anything in particular, just drifting, the way his thoughts had begun to drift these days, aimless and a little bit lost. He could hear the soft rustle of movement from the kitchen. Linda was making breakfast. Eggs, probably, maybe toast, but even that had changed. She moved like a ghost now, careful not to make a sound, avoiding eye contact, avoiding him. They still said good morning, still shared meals, still watched the evening news together, but something essential had gone missing. The warmth, the closeness, the quiet, loving glances that used to pass between them like unspoken poetry. Now there was only this persistent, aching silence. 40 years of marriage had taught John many things: how to read her moods from across a room, how to make her laugh when the world felt heavy, how to sense when she needed space without her asking. But now, as she moved silently through the house like a stranger, he realized he couldn't read her at all. She had become a mystery inside the body he once knew so well. He thought back to the early days when everything was noisy and clumsy and full of life. Their laughter used to echo through the walls. They would bump into each other in the tiny kitchen of their first apartment, kiss like teenagers in parking lots, hold hands during church sermons. That warmth hadn't disappeared all at once. It had faded slowly, like the colors of a photograph left in the sun too long. At first, John thought it was just aging. After all, their bodies had changed, their routines had slowed, their priorities shifted. But this wasn't about time passing. This was something else, something she wasn't telling him. The bed was the first place he noticed the shift. Linda had started going to sleep early, curling up with her back to him. She stopped wearing the silk nightgown he loved, replacing it with thick cotton and extra blankets. At first, he didn't think much of it. She's cold, he told himself. But even on warm nights, she pulled away when he reached for her. Her touch, once familiar and frequent, had become rare and guarded. He had asked her, once softly in the dark, "Is something wrong?" She had hesitated, then mumbled, "I'm just tired," before turning her back again. He didn't push. He never pushed. That was his way: respect her boundaries, let her speak in her own time. But days turned to weeks, and the distance between them felt less like a pause and more like a wall. And what hurt the most wasn't the absence of intimacy. It was the absence of intention, no explanation, no vulnerability, no space to understand. They were both inhabiting the same home, but in entirely separate emotional universes. This morning felt no different. The clatter of dishes in the kitchen ended, and Linda appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She gave him a polite smile, the kind you might offer a neighbor, not a husband of 40 years. "Breakfast's ready," she said. "Thanks," John replied, setting down his coffee. She turned away quickly, already heading back to the kitchen before he could rise. And just like that, the moment was gone. As he walked into the dining room, he noticed the table was set neatly, precisely, his plate on the left, hers on the right, a folded napkin in the center, 2 forks side by side like polite strangers attending a formal dinner. He sat, picking at his eggs. Across from him, Linda sipped tea, eyes fixed on the window, not the man sitting across from her. John studied her face, soft lines etched by time and worry, eyes that once danced with fire, now distant. She looked tired, but it was a deeper tired than sleep could fix. He wanted to reach for her hand just to feel that connection again, but he stopped himself. Something inside him whispered that even a simple touch might not be welcome anymore. He missed her, not just the version from their youth, but even the woman she had been a year ago. Before the silence, before the hesitation, he wondered, was this how love ended? not with shouting or slammed doors, but with quiet breakfasts and careful distance. He wasn't ready to accept that. But how do you fight for someone who's slowly slipping away and won't tell you why? There was a time when silence between John and Linda meant comfort, not distance. A shared glance, a quiet smile, the simple joy of existing side by side without needing to speak. Those moments had once been their language of love. But long before the stillness became unsettling, their lives had been filled with the beautiful noise of two people discovering the world through each other. It was the summer of 1974 when John first saw her. He was 21, fresh out of his teaching program, taking a summer job at a youth camp in Bend, Oregon. The sun was cruel that week, scorching everything in sight. But when he saw Linda across the dusty path near the canteen, he remembered thinking that she made the heat bearable. She wasn't doing anything remarkable, just refilling water bottles with a group of kids, laughing as she spilled some on her own shirt. But there was something in the way she tilted her head when she laughed, something so unguarded and full of life, that it made John stop walking. He didn't even realize he'd been staring until one of the kids bumped into him and said, "You okay, mister?" They spoke that evening over boxed spaghetti and canned peaches at a long wooden picnic table. She told him she was in her second year of nursing school and only at the camp for 3 weeks. He told her he was going to teach history and had a part-time job shelving books at the local library. Neither of them tried to impress the other. They just talked, easily, as though the conversation had started long before they'd ever met. The following days were a blur of shared duties and stolen moments. A walk by the lake when the kids were asleep, a note slipped into his cabin, folded in 4, her handwriting looped and wide. "There's something about you. Don't go home without telling me what it is." He never did figure out what she meant by that, but he knew he didn't want to let her go. By August, they were inseparable. By Christmas, they were engaged. Their wedding was small, just close friends and family in a church that smelled faintly of wax and lilies. Linda wore a borrowed dress with a lace hem slightly too long for her, and John couldn't stop smiling as she walked toward him. It wasn't a grand event, but it was theirs. Afterward, they drove to the coast in his beat-up Ford Pinto, staying in a motel with squeaky beds and thin walls, falling asleep to the sound of the waves and the occasional loud snore from the room next door. Life came at them quickly after that. They moved into a tiny duplex with creaky floors and a leaky faucet. Linda worked overnight shifts at the hospital while John began teaching at a high school just a few blocks away. Money was tight, but love wasn't. They danced in their socks in the living room, made pancakes for dinner when paychecks ran low, and left each other notes on the fridge, always ending with "P.S. I love you." Children came, 2 of them, Jane and Tom. First came Jane, small and loud and full of questions, then Tom, quiet and watchful, always trailing behind his sister. Parenting tested them, stretched them, but also deepened them. They took turns waking up at night, attending school plays, patching scraped knees, and worrying about fevers. The love didn't fade, it matured. It moved from passion to partnership, from roses to grocery lists scribbled together at the kitchen table. There were fights, of course, some loud, some quiet, some over real things, others over nothing at all. But they always found their way back, a favorite meal made after a long day, a hand resting on the small of the back in the grocery store, apologies murmured in bed. There was something sacred in their routine, in the quiet consistency of choosing each other over and over again. Even as the kids grew and left for college, and the house became too big, they filled the space with memories. Saturday morning walks to the farmer's market, book club discussions that turned into philosophical debates, garden projects that neither of them really had the patience for, but both enjoyed failing at together. It was never about grand gestures. It was the subtle rituals that made their marriage rich. The way she folded his socks just the way he liked, the way he always left the porch light on if she was out late, the way they still held hands when crossing the street, out of habit more than necessity. When John thought back on those years, he felt something deeper than nostalgia. It was gratitude. They had built something real, something that time couldn't easily erode. That's what made the present so baffling. How had they arrived at this place of distance? He had never imagined that one day Linda would seem afraid of his touch, that her eyes would carry secrets he wasn't invited to share, that their bedroom, once a sanctuary, would become a quiet battlefield of avoidance and unanswered questions. John still remembered the first time Linda had reached for his hand in the dark. That summer in 1974, her fingers were cold, unsure, but intentional. Now he found himself lying awake at night, wondering if her hands reached for him only in dreams. It was a strange kind of loneliness, to miss someone who is still sleeping beside you, to love someone so deeply, yet feel them drifting like a boat slowly pulled from its moorings. He knew that love wasn't always soft and bright. Sometimes it was silent and waiting. But how long could one wait before silence became surrender? At first it was easy to ignore. A shrug here, a polite smile there, little things that felt like nothing on their own. But looking back, John could see the pattern, the subtle shift that crept in like fog over the hills behind their house, soft and almost beautiful in its quiet arrival, until one day it surrounded everything. Linda had always been a morning person. She'd wake before him, open the curtains just enough to let the soft light in, and hum under her breath as she brewed her first cup of tea. But now she left the curtains drawn. The kitchen, once filled with the scent of mint and clove, was cold in the early hours. John found himself waking to silence, the kind that doesn't invite, only lingers. She started sleeping with a second blanket, tucking it tight around her body like a barrier. Her nightgowns changed too, from soft satin to thick cotton, layered like armor. The light in their bedroom went off earlier and earlier each night, often before John even climbed into bed. Sometimes he'd enter the room to find her already turned away, her breathing slow, eyes closed, whether asleep or pretending, he wasn't sure. At first he thought she was just tired. They were both getting older, after all. Age had a way of creeping into bones and joints, into habits and preferences. But something about the way she recoiled, just slightly, when he placed a hand on her shoulder, or the way she flinched when he leaned in to kiss her cheek, felt different. It wasn't just fatigue. It was fear, or guilt, or something else he couldn't name. He started noticing other things, too. She began wearing layers during the day, even when it was warm. Long sleeves, scarves, even gloves on days that didn't call for them. She moved more slowly, more carefully, as if protecting herself from some invisible threat. Her smiles became polite, short-lived, and increasingly rare. One Saturday morning, as they prepared to visit the local farmer's market, a tradition they'd kept for years, Linda told him she'd rather stay home. No explanation, just a soft, "I'm not feeling up to it." She didn't look sick, but she looked withdrawn, like someone carefully folding herself in, becoming smaller. He brought her back a bouquet of dahlias, her favorite. She thanked him, placed them in water, and left them on the dining table without another word. They wilted in silence over the next few days, untouched. John found himself growing cautious, calculating every word, every gesture. Should he reach for her hand? Should he say something about the way she winced when she sat down or stood up? Should he ask if she was seeing a doctor? The space between them had become a landscape full of unspoken questions, and he wasn't sure which ones would start a fire if spoken aloud. He tried once, just once, to bring it up gently. They were sitting in the backyard, the autumn sun warming their faces. Leaves rustled above them, and the smell of pine hung in the air. "You've seemed off lately," he said, careful not to sound accusing. "Is something bothering you?" She looked at him, eyes steady but unreadable. "I'm fine, John," she said. Really, he wanted to believe her, but he couldn't. There was something brittle in her voice, something that sounded like it might crack if pressed. Nights were the hardest. He missed the sound of her breathing beside him, soft and steady, the weight of her body curled against his. Now he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar hush of her distance. Sometimes he reached out, letting his hand hover just inches from her back, feeling the warmth but not the permission to touch. He started writing in a journal again, something he hadn't done since his college days. Not poems, not stories, just thoughts, feelings, guesses. It helped in a way. It gave shape to his confusion. "She moves like a memory I can't quite hold," he wrote one night. Still here but slipping, he began to replay memories, searching for the moment it all began. A year ago? 2? There had been signs he was sure of it now. A missed anniversary dinner, explained away by a headache. Less eye contact, fewer spontaneous hugs in the hallway. And yet, there were still small moments of tenderness that confused him even more. A cup of tea left waiting for him when he came in from the yard. A folded sweater placed neatly on his chair. The scent of her perfume lingering faintly in the hallway. She wasn't gone. She was hiding. But from what? John started watching her more closely, not in suspicion but in concern. She moved with the stiffness of someone in pain. He noticed her grimacing when bending down, gripping the edge of the counter for balance. She rubbed her lower back often. When she thought he wasn't looking, she placed her hand gently against her stomach, as if guarding something fragile inside her. It wasn't just emotional distance, something was happening in her body. He considered asking her again, begging her, even, but something told him that if he pushed too hard, she'd retreat further. So he waited, and watched, and worried. One night he reached for her hand in the dark. She didn't pull away, but she didn't hold on either. Her fingers lay limp against his, and after a few minutes, she gently withdrew. It felt like a goodbye he wasn't ready to receive. The silence between them had become heavier than words, more present than sound. It filled their home like fog, thick and still and stubborn. John sat with it night after night, hoping it would lift, hoping she would speak, hoping whatever she was hiding wasn't already too big to carry alone. The hardest part wasn't the absence of answers. It was the slow, creeping doubt that filled the silence in their place. John had always trusted Linda, implicitly, unwaveringly. Trust was never something they had to build. It had been there from the beginning, like the foundation beneath their shared life. But now cracks had begun to form, not in her, perhaps, but in his certainty. And that was something he had never anticipated. He began to notice things that had never caught his attention before: the way she kept her phone close, even in the bathroom; the way she ended calls quickly if he walked into the room; the low, unreadable tone of her voice when she spoke to someone on the other end. Never long conversations, always brief, clipped. Her laptop, which she once left open on the dining table, was now closed and tucked away in their bedroom drawer. He hated that he noticed, hated that suspicion had found a home in his chest, but it settled there anyway, cold and unwelcome. John didn't want to be the kind of man who checked phones or snooped through drawers, but one evening, while Linda was taking a long bath upstairs, he found himself alone in the kitchen, her phone resting on the counter. He looked at it, just looked. He didn't touch it, but the urge to unlock it, to scroll, to know, was almost unbearable. Instead, he walked outside. The air was crisp, and the night sky was clear, full of stars that felt both comforting and impossibly far away. He sat on the back steps and let the cold bite at his skin. He needed to believe there was another explanation, something he hadn't considered. What if it wasn't about someone else? What if it was about him? Had he changed more than he realized? Had he become inattentive, boring, predictable? Linda had always loved his steadiness, but maybe that had grown stale over time. Maybe she craved something else, something he no longer had the energy or imagination to offer. He began to catalog every possible failure: the times he'd forgotten small anniversaries, the missed cues, the days he came home too tired to talk, the nights he fell asleep too quickly. Had he stopped noticing her? Had he stopped seeing the woman she was still trying to be? He thought back to their last real vacation, almost 4 years ago, a trip to the coast to celebrate their anniversary. They'd stayed in a cozy bed and breakfast near Cannon Beach. He remembered the way she'd stood at the window, looking out at the ocean, her hair tangled from sleep, the morning light making her skin look young again. He'd taken a photo of her that day. It was still in his wallet. He pulled it out now and again, like a compass trying to find its north. She had been smiling in that photo. Not just a smile for the camera, but a real one. Unburdened, alive. He hadn't seen that smile in a long time. One night, unable to sleep, John stood in the hallway outside their bedroom. He could hear Linda's breathing, soft and even. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of the bedside lamp. Her back was to him, as always, her shoulders curled inward. He wanted to wake her, to ask, to plead, to beg, not for answers, but for her. But he didn't. Instead, he walked to the spare bedroom and lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the low hum of the house. He began to fantasize about scenarios, each more painful than the last. What if she was in love with someone else? What if she had found emotional intimacy elsewhere, a friend, an old flame, a stranger? The idea felt both absurd and utterly possible. What if her distance wasn't confusion but betrayal? The uncertainty hollowed him. It didn't matter whether he was wrong or right. What mattered was that he no longer felt safe in the story they had built together. There was a page missing, a whole chapter maybe, and he wasn't sure who had written it. He became quieter around her, less curious, less open, not out of anger but self-preservation. If she was hiding something, he didn't want to push her into lies. If she wasn't, he didn't want to hear the truth before he was ready. He began to watch her for clues, the way her expression changed when she got a message, the subtle sigh after she ended a call, the time she said she had gone to the pharmacy but came back with nothing new in the bag. One afternoon, he came home early from the store. Her car was in the driveway, but the house was unusually quiet. He called her name. No answer. As he stepped into the living room, he heard her voice, soft, urgent, from upstairs. She was on the phone. He didn't make a sound. "I know. I'm trying," she said. A pause. "He doesn't know anything." Another pause. "I just need more time." John stood frozen. The words hit like a slow-moving freight train. He should have walked away, should have let her finish, should have respected her space, but the wave of betrayal was too strong, and it cracked something open in him. He didn't confront her, not yet. He walked out, got into his car, and drove aimlessly for over an hour. The roads were familiar, but he saw none of them. All he could hear were those words, "He doesn't know anything." And what didn't he know? That night he barely spoke. Linda asked if something was wrong. He said no. His voice was hollow, and she noticed, but didn't press. Maybe she was waiting too. Maybe whatever it was she was carrying, it was getting too heavy for her as well. But John couldn't stop the churn in his chest. For the first time in their long marriage, he felt like a stranger in his own life, like he was living beside a woman he no longer understood. The distance was no longer subtle, it was undeniable, and it was growing. The message came on a Wednesday, a quiet, windless afternoon. John had returned early from the grocery store, arms full of oranges and milk and the bread Linda liked, the kind with seeds she always pretended to dislike but ate anyway. He stepped inside, setting the bags on the counter, calling her name gently through the silence. No answer, only the faint sound of water upstairs. The house smelled like eucalyptus and soap. She must have just showered. John began putting groceries away, slow and methodical, the way he always did. His hands moved on autopilot, eggs in the fridge, oranges in the bowl by the window, bread on the table. Then he noticed it, her phone, unlocked and face up on the counter. The screen was still glowing. He didn't mean to look. Truly, he didn't. But the message had just arrived, and the words sat plainly on the screen, impossible to unsee. "Mark, keep doing what I told you. Let me know if it gets worse." A strange stillness took hold of him. Not fear, not even rage, just that cold, quiet paralysis that comes when the world tilts, and suddenly nothing is where it should be. He stared at the screen, not moving, not blinking. Then, slowly, the light dimmed and the phone went dark again, as if to swallow the message back into whatever void it had come from. Mark. John didn't know a Mark, not in their circle, not among family, not among the neighbors or old classmates or even the book club men he vaguely remembered from Linda's volunteer years. The words weren't romantic, not on the surface. There were no hearts, no "I miss you," no suggestive punctuation. But there was something in the tone, the familiarity, the authority. "Keep doing what I told you." Not a suggestion, not friendly advice, an instruction, an expectation. And Linda, his Linda, was taking orders from someone he didn't know. He stood there for what felt like an hour, but it was probably just a minute. The shower stopped upstairs. Pipes groaned, the soft creak of the bathroom door, the familiar pattern of footsteps down the hallway. John picked up a bag of flour and started organizing the pantry, hands trembling only slightly. Linda entered the kitchen, hair still damp, a towel wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl. She smiled, tired but warm. "You're back early." He nodded. Traffic was light. She began helping with the groceries, humming quietly under her breath. It was almost cruel how normal everything felt, the familiarity of it, the intimacy of routine. And yet, in John's mind, the words still floated like oil on water. He doesn't know anything. She had said that days ago, on the phone upstairs. Now it made sense. Now it felt like betrayal wrapped in softness. He didn't say anything. Not then. He couldn't. The words would have come out too jagged, too loud. Instead, he moved through the rest of the day in a kind of half-awareness, watching her with new eyes. Who was she talking to? Who was Mark? That night, sleep evaded him. He lay awake, eyes open in the dark, the ceiling above him feeling impossibly far away. Linda's breathing beside him was steady, but now it felt rehearsed, too regular, like someone pretending to be asleep, like someone pretending, period. By morning, he had decided he would find out. He waited until she was in the garden, her new ritual, early weeding and deadheading flowers that barely bloomed anymore. She said it helped her mind feel clear. Lately, she spent more time in the soil than she did with him. He found her phone easily. It was in her purse, unzipped, unlocked. She trusted him. That was the part that broke his heart the most. The message thread with Mark wasn't long, but it was recent and full of questions he couldn't answer. Mark, try the cream twice a day now. Don't forget to hydrate. Let me know if the stinging increases. We may need to try something else. You're doing the right thing not telling him yet. When you're ready, you'll know. There was more. Clinical language, mentions of atrophy, lubricants, vaginal walls. John's eyes scanned faster and faster, his breath caught somewhere in his throat. This wasn't a lover. This was a doctor. Mark was, apparently, someone Linda had been consulting privately. Maybe a specialist. Maybe just someone she trusted more than her regular physician. But not a threat. Not in the way John had feared. The relief hit him like a wave, and yet it was followed, almost immediately, by a deeper ache. Not because she had betrayed him with another man, but because she hadn't trusted him with this. She had chosen silence over his partnership, pain over vulnerability. He didn't feel angry, he felt unnecessary. He left the phone where he found it and returned to the kitchen, made coffee, waited. She entered a few minutes later, gloves in one hand, dirt on her knees. "Morning," she said. He looked at her and felt something like love and something like sorrow. "I saw your messages," he said quietly. She froze. Her lips parted, but no words came, just a slow blink, a flush of red on her cheeks. I thought maybe there was someone else," he admitted. She set the gloves down slowly on the counter. Her face was unreadable for a long moment. Then her shoulders dropped, and she let out a shaky breath. "There's not," she said. "There never was. Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him, eyes shining now. "Because it's humiliating, John. Because I didn't want you to see me like this." "Like what?" "Like I'm broken." The word hung in the air between them, fragile and cruel. "You're not broken," he said, barely above a whisper. "You're hurt, and I should have seen it sooner." She sat down at the kitchen table, burying her face in her hands. He watched her shoulders shake, her breath catch, and he did what he hadn't done in weeks. He sat beside her, reached for her hand, held it firmly. She let him. Not just her hand, but the weight she had been carrying. Slowly, piece by piece, she began to speak about the pain, the dryness, the shame, the embarrassment of something so personal, so intimate, turning into something clinical and foreign. "It started over a year ago," she said. "I thought it would go away. I tried to ignore it, but every time we were close, it hurt, and I didn't want to hurt, or to hurt you." John listened. He didn't interrupt. He let the words settle, let her speak until there was nothing left but quiet again. This time, it wasn't the same silence. It wasn't avoidance, it was understanding. And in that stillness, he realized something simple and profound. Love isn't knowing everything. It's being willing to stay, even when you don't. In the weeks that followed, the air between them shifted, not dramatically, but perceptibly. As if someone had cracked a window in a long-sealed room, letting something warm and alive drift back in. Not everything was better, not all at once, but it was different now. The silence between them had softened. It no longer carried suspicion. It held space, space for truth, space for healing. John began to move differently around Linda. Not out of pity, but intention. Where once he hesitated to touch her, now he asked. A brush of her hand, a gentle hand on her back as she passed by. Small gestures offered without pressure, without expectation. Sometimes she accepted, sometimes she pulled away. He honored both. He read everything he could. Late into the night, he sat at the kitchen table with his reading glasses perched low on his nose, combing through articles, forums, medical journals. Terms like genitourinary syndrome of menopause, vaginal atrophy, and topical estrogen therapy became part of his vocabulary. But what he searched for more than anything was understanding, not of the condition itself, but of the woman he loved who had kept it hidden for so long. He realized, painfully, that her silence hadn't come from a lack of love, but from a fear of being seen as something less than whole. She had been ashamed not of the pain, but of the impact it might have on how he saw her. She didn't want his sympathy. She wanted his presence, his partnership, his patience. So he gave it in every way he knew how. He started waking up earlier just to make her tea the way she liked it. weak, with a dash of honey and a lemon slice. He warmed her heating pad before she asked. On evenings when the pain was worse, he offered to read to her aloud, books they had both read before, stories familiar enough to soothe. He learned how to ask without interrogating. "How are you feeling today?" Not as a formality, but with real curiosity. And sometimes, she answered honestly. "Tired," she'd say. "Tight, sore." He never flinched at her words. He let them land, acknowledged them, and held space for her without rushing to fix anything. One night as they lay in bed, John reached out, not for her body but for her heart. "I miss us," he said quietly. Linda turned to face him, her eyes already wet. "So do I," she whispered. They didn't speak for a long time after that, just held hands in the dark, their fingers entwined like old roots rediscovering the soil. Over time, intimacy began to return, not in the way it once was, but in new forms, shared routines, shared stillness, shared laughter that bubbled up again in the quiet moments when neither of them expected it. They began taking walks again, short at first, just around the block. John noticed how Linda leaned into his arm more than before, how she smiled more often at the neighbors. He knew she was still in pain, but now she was allowing herself to be seen in that pain. That was progress. One afternoon, they went to the bookstore downtown, the same one they'd taken the kids to when they were young. John watched Linda as she browsed the shelves, her fingers brushing over the spines of books with delicate reverence. She looked peaceful, focused, whole. He thought of how much courage it had taken for her to talk to him, to admit not just the physical changes, but the emotional ones, the fear, the sense of fading, and how much courage it took for her to let him stay. At the counter, he bought a book without telling her. It was a journal, leather-bound, with a soft, worn cover and thick pages. That night, he placed it on her nightstand with a note inside. "For the things you don't want to say out loud, I'll read them only if you ask me to. Love, Jay." She didn't speak about it that night, but a week later she handed it to him, the ribbon marking a page halfway through. He opened it and read, "Today, for the first time in over a year, I let him hold me. I didn't pull away, I didn't freeze, I just let go, and I didn't feel broken. I felt real, still me, still his." Tears welled in his eyes as he closed the book. He didn't say anything, just reached for her hand and kissed her knuckles one by one. They began seeing a therapist together. Not for crisis management, but for reconnection. A soft-spoken woman in her 60s who specialized in couples navigating intimacy after menopause. It felt strange at first, sitting in a softly lit room with someone asking them how they touched each other, how they communicated needs, how they felt about their aging bodies. But slowly, it became a space of safety, a place where shame dissolved and tenderness returned. Linda began a new treatment plan, under the guidance of a new gynecologist who made her feel heard. The pain didn't vanish overnight, but it lessened. Some days were better than others, but now they faced it together. There was no timeline, no deadline for when they would return to how things were. John had stopped hoping for return altogether. Instead, he looked forward, toward something new, something honest. He stopped seeing their love as a circle trying to close, and began seeing it as a spiral, growing, widening, moving forward even as it curved back on itself. On their 46th anniversary, John planned nothing grand. No dinner reservations, no flowers, just a slow morning at home, followed by a walk in the park where they used to bring the kids. The sun filtered through the trees. Linda wore a soft gray scarf and smiled at something he said. He couldn't even remember what. But her eyes crinkled at the corners and her laughter was unguarded. That evening they sat on the porch, the sky streaked with orange and violet, a mug of chamomile tea between them. Linda leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For not giving up. Even when I did." John didn't answer right away. He looked out at the fading light, then turned to her. "You didn't give up," he said. "You held on the only way you knew how. And I just held on with you." The wind rustled the trees above them. The day gave way to twilight, and for the first time in a long while, they didn't feel like two people fighting to remember how to love each other. They felt like two people learning it all over again, together. The peace they had rediscovered was fragile, beautiful, but delicate, like the first thin layer of ice across a still pond. It held, but it was not yet strong, and so, when the second shadow fell across their lives, it landed with disproportionate weight, threatening to shatter what they had only just begun to rebuild. It started as a routine checkup. Linda had finally agreed to see a new gynecologist, a woman recommended by their therapist, someone who specialized in postmenopausal care. John had waited in the car, flipping through an old paperback while she went in, hopeful and perhaps even a little relieved. Progress, he thought. Another step forward. But the appointment took longer than expected. He checked his watch twice, then again, and when she finally came out, her face was calm, unreadable. But he knew something had shifted. He knew it before she opened the door, before she sat beside him, before she even spoke. They found something, she said. His heart stilled. Something? A mass. In the uterus. Her voice was steady, too steady. Could be fibroids, could be something else. They want to run more tests. A biopsy. John's hand found hers instantly. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Not because he didn't want to comfort her, but because he knew that no words would land right now. All he could do was hold on. The following days blurred into hospital visits and blood draws and imaging scans. The word oncology appeared too soon, too casually, and John began to feel the familiar weight of helplessness pressing against his ribs again. But this was different from the silence they had faced before. This wasn't distance by choice. This was fear. Real primal fear. Linda tried to stay calm, to smile when the nurses joked or when John made small talk, to fill the silence between appointments. But in the quiet moments, late at night when the world had gone still, he could feel the tremor in her body, the way she curled into herself just a little more, as if trying to become smaller, invisible to whatever fate waited outside the bedroom door. One evening, as rain drummed softly against the windows, John sat on the edge of the bed watching her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so much like herself, that it made something ache inside him. He remembered the first time he had watched her sleep decades ago in a cabin by the lake after their first camping trip. Back then, he had thought he could watch her forever. Now forever felt like a dangerous promise. The results were due in a week. 7 days stretched out like 7 lifetimes. John went through them in slow motion, hovering near her without hovering too close. He cooked her favorite meals, played the jazz records she liked in the evenings, and never asked how she was feeling unless she spoke first. She appreciated the space and the quiet and the knowing. On the 5th night, John found himself in the garage, digging through an old box marked Camping, Emisk. In it, buried beneath tangled cords and forgotten lanterns, was his old tape recorder. It still worked. He tested it with a fresh set of batteries, the motor whirring softly to life. He didn't know exactly why he had pulled it out, but as he sat alone at the dining table that night, a candle flickering beside him, he pressed record and began to speak. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, voice low, calm. "It's just me. I know we're not supposed to think the worst, and I'm not, but I needed to say a few things anyway, just in case." His voice faltered. He paused, breathed. "I don't know how to love anyone the way I love you. I don't think I ever will. And I guess I just wanted to thank you. For the laughter, for the fights, for the long years and the quiet mornings and the hard parts too. Especially the hard parts. I wouldn't trade them for anything," he went on. "Not for drama, not for catharsis. Just to mark the moment. To make sure that if time betrayed them, he would not." The next morning, he left the recorder on her nightstand with a note. "You can listen to it if you want, or not. No pressure." She didn't say anything right away, just picked it up, held it in her hands for a long time, then placed it gently back down. "I'll listen when I'm ready," she said. The day of the results came. They drove in silence to the clinic, hands clasped between them. When the doctor walked in with the file, John's grip tightened around hers. "It's benign," she said, eyes soft, voice clear. "The mass is a fibroid, non-cancerous. We'll remove it laparoscopically, and you should recover well." Linda nodded. John exhaled, deep and shaky. Relief filled the room like oxygen. Back home, they sat on the couch, not speaking, just breathing. Finally, Linda looked at him and said, "You thought you were going to lose me." He nodded. "So did I," she whispered. That night, they didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no toasts, just the sound of rain again, and 2 people sitting in the dark, grateful not for the absence of danger, but for the sudden clarity of what they meant to each other. They lay in bed later, closer than usual, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "You scared me," she said. "You scared me more," he replied. A pause. "Do you want to hear what you recorded?" she asked. He looked at her. "Only if you're ready." She reached for the tape recorder, pressed play, and they lay there together, listening to his voice echo softly in the room, his words, raw and trembling, wrapped around them like a second blanket. When it ended, she said nothing. She didn't need to. John turned toward her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Whatever time we have," he said, "it's enough as long as it's with you." And for the first time since the shadow had appeared, they fell asleep with hope on their side. Recovery came not in one sweeping motion, but in thousands of small, quiet ones: a glass of water at the right moment, a touch without hesitation, a conversation that didn't circle around pain or fear, but settled comfortably in memory, in routine, in warmth. After the surgery, Linda slept more. She moved a little slower, ate smaller portions, and smiled more easily than she had in months. The shadow had lifted. Not completely, John didn't expect that, but enough for the light to break through again. One morning, a week after the procedure, John left a note on the nightstand before heading out for groceries. It was handwritten on the inside flap of an old book he knew she liked, one about a woman who left everything behind to start over in her 70s. "I know you're not starting over, but I like the idea that we are. Every day feels a little bit like a new beginning, and I'm thankful for everyone we get to share." She didn't mention it that day, but he noticed the book had moved from her nightstand to the coffee table, so he wrote another one. This time, he used a yellow sticky note, folded neatly into the lid of her favorite tea tin. "If love was only measured in big gestures, we would have been out of fuel years ago. But you taught me that love lives in teaspoons and flannel blankets and waiting quietly when it hurts." And so it began, a new habit, a ritual that neither of them labeled but both cherished. He left her notes everywhere, in drawers, under pillows, inside folded laundry. Not long confessions or declarations, just lines, moments, thoughts that would have otherwise slipped through the cracks of a busy day. She began saving them, not in a box or folder. She simply let them exist where they landed, a trail of affection, scattered throughout the house. Sometimes she responded, a note taped to the bathroom mirror: "Thank you for seeing me even when I tried to disappear." Or one tucked into the newspaper: "You still make my coffee better by sitting across from me while I drink it." Their intimacy became something new. It wasn't about closeness in bed or whispers in the dark. It was a tenderness lived out in daylight, in gestures, in letters without envelopes. They resumed their evening walks. The air was cooler now, the leaves darker. Fall was settling into the town like an old friend, familiar and firm. Linda liked to walk slowly, stopping to examine every unusual flower, every squirrel darting up a tree. John let her set the pace, his hand always loosely in hers. They didn't talk much on these walks. Words felt unnecessary. Their silence now was full, not empty. It said, "I'm here, you're here, that's enough." One afternoon, as they passed the bookstore, Linda paused. "I want to go in," she said. It was the first time she'd made a suggestion in weeks. Inside, she wandered through the aisles, her fingers tracing the covers of books, like she was reconnecting with old friends. John watched her from a short distance, letting her take the lead. She chose a small hardcover, pale green, with gold lettering. When he asked what it was, she handed it to him without a word. The title read, "100 Ways to Say I Love You Without Saying a Word." That night, she placed it on the windowsill of their bedroom. Next to it, she leaned a new note against the glass. "We may not have 100 ways, but we're finding our own." Sometimes John wondered how much time they had left. It wasn't a morbid thought, just a practical one. They were getting older. The body could not be reasoned with. But the heart, he'd learned, could be reawakened, even when it seemed buried under months of silence and shadows. He began writing longer notes, not daily, but often enough. One night he stayed up after she'd gone to sleep, sitting at the dining room table with a cup of tea gone cold, pen in hand. "Do you remember the first time we drove through the rain together?" He wrote, "We were 19 miles from home, in a car that leaked from the roof and steamed up the windows. You were laughing so hard you couldn't breathe, and I kept pretending to be annoyed so you'd laugh even harder. I think about that night more than you know, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was simple and full of us." He didn't leave this one out for her to find. He folded it, placed it in his wallet behind the photo of her from their beach trip, and carried it with him for days. Eventually he gave it to her, not with ceremony, just handed it across the table one morning. She didn't read it right away, but when she did, he knew. She came to him that evening and sat beside him on the porch, her head resting against his shoulder. "You've always had better words than me," she said. "You've always had better timing." They chuckled together, and then they just sat, watching the sky turn from blue to amber to soft gray. Linda's physical healing continued. She regained energy slowly, reclaimed her appetite, took on small tasks around the house again. But what mattered more to John was that her spirit seemed to return. Her laughter had weight again. Her eyes didn't drift when he spoke. And then, one night, she came to bed wearing a nightgown he hadn't seen in over a year. It was soft and simple, not the thick cotton armor she'd adopted during the months of pain and retreat. She didn't say anything, just climbed into bed beside him, close but not urgent. He didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. She reached for him. Their embrace was slow, careful, not about passion or urgency, but about presence, about trust, about the slow return to something not lost, but waiting. Later, they lay in silence, her head on his chest, his hand on her shoulder, no words, no letters, no need. It wasn't a grand transformation. There were no violins, no sudden fireworks, no sweeping revelations that changed everything. But when John looked at Linda across the breakfast table that crisp March morning, her hair loosely tied back, eyes clear and unguarded, he realized something had shifted again. Peace had returned, not the shallow kind that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind built slowly, stone by stone, from honesty, patience, and choosing each other all over again. It had been nearly a year since the silence began, a year since he'd first noticed her pulling away, since the long nights of guessing, the guarded smiles, the distance in her touch. And yet now, they sat together not just as husband and wife, but as two people who had walked through pain without turning away. Linda was fully recovered from the surgery, the bruising had faded, her energy had returned, and the medications had settled into their rhythm. The worst of it, the waiting, the fear, the not knowing, was behind them. But it wasn't just her body that had healed. It was something quieter, more invisible, that had begun to mend. She had begun humming again. At first it was small, a single note under her breath while washing dishes, a melody half remembered as she folded towels. But John noticed, and each time it landed in his chest like a gentle knock. She's coming back. We're coming back. They had established new rituals. Sunday mornings at the local diner, sitting in their regular booth by the window, sharing one newspaper and two coffees. Evening walks, always at her pace, and the letters, still written, not daily now, but often enough to keep the rhythm alive. One day, Linda placed a small wooden box on his desk. Inside were all the notes he'd ever written her, carefully folded, neatly stacked, some yellowed at the edges. "I thought you didn't keep them," he said, running his hand across the top sheet. "I didn't need to look at them," she replied. They were already doing their job. The quiet between them was different now. It wasn't born of retreat, but of comfort. They didn't need to fill every silence. They just needed to be in it together. One afternoon, as they worked in the garden, Linda turned to him suddenly, gloves streaked with soil, cheeks flushed from the sun. "Do you ever think we wasted time?" she asked. John paused, leaning on his shovel. "I used to," he admitted. "But now, I think we did the best we could with what we knew." She nodded slowly. "I think I was afraid you'd stop seeing me, that you'd only see what was changing." "I did see what was changing," he said, "but I never stopped seeing you." That night they sat side by side on the couch, flipping through an old photo album, their children as toddlers, their first gray hairs, their disastrous attempt at a home renovation in '95. They laughed, truly laughed, until their sides ached. Linda leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for staying." He kissed the top of her head. "I wasn't going anywhere." The return was quiet, but it was real. One evening in late spring, they hosted dinner for their daughter Jane and her family. The house was full again, laughter, dishes clinking, the scent of roast chicken in the air. Their grandson crawled under the table, giggling. Jane commented on how well Linda looked, how relaxed John seemed. "I haven't seen you two this happy in a long time," she said, half teasing. John looked at Linda across the table. She raised an eyebrow. "It took us a while," Linda said, "but we found each other again." After the guests left and the dishes were done, John stepped outside to the porch, breathing in the cool air. Linda joined him, wrapping her sweater tighter around her frame. They watched the moon rise together in silence. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. "Of what?" "Of being seen, of fading, of not being enough." John reached for her hand. "You were always enough," he said. "Even when you couldn't see it." They sat like that for a long time. No music, no movement, just the hum of crickets and the sound of wind brushing through leaves. Linda rested her head against his shoulder, and he thought, this is what coming back feels like. not to the past, but to the present, to now, to her. He didn't need things to go back to how they were, because what they had now, this deeper, quieter kind of love, was no less profound. If anything, it was more sacred. It was the love of people who had weathered life together. It was the love of survivors. 1 year to the day after Linda's diagnosis, John found himself sitting in a room with 12 other couples, all of them over 60, all of them holding hands, some firmly, some tentatively, and some with the quiet comfort of decades shared. The community center's Relationships After 60 workshop was not something John ever imagined attending. It wasn't his style. But when Linda handed him the brochure with that subtle smile that always meant "I'm asking, but I'm really hoping you'll say yes," he had nodded without hesitation. "I think we've already passed the test," he had said. "Maybe," she replied, "but it doesn't hurt to learn a little more." The room smelled faintly of coffee and lavender. Folding chairs in a circle, a whiteboard with a quote written in soft marker, "Love isn't something you fall into. It's something you return to, again and again." The instructor, a silver-haired woman with a voice like warm bread, spoke gently about connection, about how love changes shape, but not depth, about how intimacy after loss, after illness, after silence is not only possible, it can be even more profound. John glanced at Linda during the session. She was listening intently, her posture relaxed, a pen in her lap, though she wasn't taking notes. She was just there, fully, openly. When they were asked to turn to their partners and complete a sentence, "One thing I love about you now that I didn't understand before," John hesitated. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because there were too many ways to say it. Linda looked at him and said quietly, "You first." He took a deep breath, then smiled. "I didn't understand," he began, "how strong you are when you're quiet, how much you carry without needing anyone to see it. I used to think love meant always knowing what the other was feeling. Now I know. Sometimes love means just being willing to stay while they figure it out." Her eyes softened. She placed her hand on his cheek and whispered, "I didn't understand how deeply you see me, even when I try to disappear." They didn't need to say more. When the session ended, they walked out into the early evening. The sun hung low, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Linda slipped her arm through John's, and they strolled slowly, neither of them in a rush. "You know," she said, "I didn't think we'd end up like this." "Like what?" he asked, still curious, still growing, still choosing. He squeezed her arm gently. "Love isn't static. It's movement. It's choosing." Every day, they passed a small park, the swings empty, a few leaves chasing each other in the wind. It reminded John of the years when their children were small, when life was louder and messier, but somehow simpler. Now, everything was quieter, but not lesser. That night, at home, John placed a new notebook on Linda's pillow. The cover was blank. Inside the first page, he had written only this: "Let's fill this one together." She didn't ask with what, letters, memories, dreams. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they would fill it, that they would keep writing, not to fix anything, but to keep moving forward, side by side, page by page. In the years to come, they would face more changes, more aches, more uncertainty, but they had already learned the most important thing. Love doesn't vanish with age. It doesn't fade when bodies change. It doesn't crumble in silence. It waits, and if you're willing, if you're brave enough, you can find your way back to it, even when it looks nothing like before, because love at its deepest is not a feeling, it's a decision. And every morning, John and Linda made it again, together. Love doesn't always speak in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in the waiting, in the quiet forgiveness, in learning how to hold each other again when words fall short and bodies change. If this story made you feel something, maybe a memory, a question, or just a little warmth, then you're not alone. We all carry pieces of love that are hard to put into words. So if you'd like to hear more stories that speak to the heart, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and stay with us, because here, every story is a gentle reminder that it's never too late to love again.